Can Africa rise? I am Nurul Mostafa Kamal Zafari. I am the editor of TOT World. I am welcoming you to this small discussion on Africa. And as you are supporting our channel, TOT World, and I'd love to request you again, it's you whose support is tremendously important for us to continue to our work and also to promote the message that you like the most. It's you whose viewership is very vital and it will contribute to independent editorship. And also, it's you who allows us to uphold our motto around the globe among the communities. And we speak your own voice. Let's start. Can Africa rise? It is said that by the colonial powers, it is propagated and said by them that Africa is a continent of darkness. We studied it for a long time in our textbooks. It's been shown, and Africa has been presented in such a way that Africa only can be ignorant, Africa only can be dark, Africa can only be illiterate, Africa can only be a war zone. And in the course of Cold War, the African countries has shown their strengths, their commitment to self-rule, self-governance, and self-determination, their power to take the decision on their own fate. And they have shown it by claiming their rightful independence and liberty and their power to exercise their freedom and their liberty. And we've seen that African continent has got their independence during Cold War. And Africa is going forward in many areas like in education, in scientific development, in exploration of natural resources, in democratization, in political exercise, in terms of military power, in terms of their role in geopolitics. And we can see the things in a very, very inclusive way. They are doing the things. Like, for example, we can refer the establishment of the African Union, COMESA, ECOWAS, African Development Bank, and we see that there are different economic councils too. Those are working to ensure African development. We see African countries are now claiming a permanent membership with the veto power in the Security Council of the United Nations. One of the African countries, South Africa, is a founding member of BRICS, and we know that BRICS is challenging the developed countries, especially D8, and BRICS has challenged the SWIFT system and also the dollar-based economic order, international economic order. So Africa is now going forward in their own way. But still, one question remains very relevant, and I will explain why. And that question is, can Africa rise? When Africa is being united under the umbrella of African Union, they have COMESA, they have uh, ECOWAS, they have African Court of Justice, they have uh, different other bodies, including African Development Bank. But still, why this question is coming forward? To talk about this question, I would love to refer from the recent speech of one of the African Pan-Africanist, one of the greatest sons of Africa, Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, and his mention that African leaders are still being summoned, being roll called in the classroom by the USA. Once they are called by the Washington, they simply rallied over there. They have been called by name as enrolled student in the classrooms by the US president. Africa cannot solve their own problem. The crisis between Congo and Rwanda, Africa needs American mediators. The crisis in Ethiopia, Africa needs American mediators, the Western mediators. In the crisis of Western Sahara, Sahrawi crisis, Ethiopian crisis, Africa needs Western mediators. In the crisis of Nigeria, Africa needs America to bomb in the locations of deemed and perceived terrorists' outfits. Africa needs to open their doors unconditionally to the Chinese investors for Chinese resources to come in the African countries. Having said that, the contracts, the agreements are not win-win contracts, are not respectful. Still, Africa needs to open its doors to Indian to get recognized as a safe destination of investment. Africa cannot bargain. Africa cannot look face to face, cannot propose their own agenda of a respectful deal. The deal that dictates clearly what Africa will get in exchange of the deal. It is not proposed by any experts that Africa will not do trade or Africa will not allow the West or China or Indian investors or Russian investors. But what they are trying to say is Africa should have a 50-50 share, a win-win share, a legitimate partnership that is respectful and that is conducted in a dignified manner. That is what Pan Africanists are saying. They are not necessarily proposing that Africa should not welcome Russian military advisors. Rather, they are comfortable to say that Africa will allow them not to dictate or govern, but to serve as a partner to build and rebuild African militaries so that African armed forces can protect their lands, waters, and space and air. And that's why the question arises, can Africa rise? And Africa needs to rise. It has no other option. But Africa should not late. Should not late. Why? A belated birthday, uh, not really, enjoyed by the girlfriend or the boyfriend. It is good to rise on time before it is too late to wish a birthday. African resources has been taken, sucked blatantly, openly, destructively, derogatively, or derogatorily by the Westerners for centuries. And it is a matter of happiness to note that still Africa has some resources. It is a good sign, uh, but Africa needs to rise today. Why? The resources are not unlimited, and Africa needs to serve its people, not the present, but also the future. To serve the future, Africa needs to rise today. And Africa should say to its partners to behave well, and needs to say that the conditions of agreements will not be written by the only Chinese or Russian or Indian or the US or the European colleagues. It will be written by both of the parties and reviewed by both of the parties. Once Africa stand on a firm foundation, a strong moral ground, only then Africa can ensure a prosperous present which will lead to a prosperous future of African grandsons and great grandsons. And to answer in one line, Africa can rise if it ensures rule of law, democracy, participation of all citizens in national development, mutual partnership by ensuring education and expanding scientific education and knowledge in African countries. And Africa needs to rise. Africa needs to challenge. I still firmly believe Africa can rise.